We've got breaking news coming in this evening that a Malaysian airliner with 295 people on board has crashed in Ukraine near the Russian border. The passenger plane was flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. Interfax news agency claims that the Malaysian Airlines passenger plane was shot down. We don't know who's responsible. But the story is at this time that apparently this plane was shot down with a missile. A Malaysia Airlines official has confirmed that the plane has indeed crashed. The airlines is due to make a statement shortly. The company has tweeted that it lost contact with MH17 after it took off from Amsterdam and its last known location was over Ukrainian airspace. A Malaysian Airlines aircraft shot down by unknown assailants. Joining us now, Air Marshal Ahluwalia, Headlines Today's Strategic Affairs Editor Gaurav Sawant. We'll have a lot more inputs coming in from Moscow. Here is, just for a moment, Russian television news reporting on this incident. Let's listen to the latest from Moscow.
I seem to be losing the connection with you.
No, we've still got you, Irina. Sorry, we've just lost you there for a moment.
I'm very sorry. The connection here has been catchy now. We're also hearing from eyewitnesses that they seem to be finding debris and body parts on the ground, but that of course cannot be confirmed at this point. So, as we're talking about it, there's still not 100% chance that the plane has gone down. I can tell you that actually we were traveling not far from the border between Russia and Ukraine at the very time of the presumed plane crash, and I did see some black smoke in the very, very far distance, and that of course raised some questions, but I cannot of course confirm with any certainty that indeed it was the smoke from the plane crash. I just knew that it was there. So this is obviously a story that is starting to gives a whole new international tragic tint to the events that are happening in the southeast of Ukraine. Obviously, an area already hit with much bloodshed in very recent weeks because of the confrontation that we've been seeing between the Ukrainian forces and the anti-Kiev forces on the ground.
Okay, Irina Galishka on the ground there for us there by the Russia-Ukraine border. Thanks so much for that update. Just to bring you that background information on, unfortunately, similar in some ways incident back in October of 2001. That was when a Siberia Airlines passenger jet exploded over the Black Sea. According to the aviation agency investigation on that occasion, it was downed by an accidental launch of a surface-to-air missile from Ukraine. That was confirmed by Russia, although Ukraine denied it was firing any rockets at the time. The plane was heading from Tel Aviv via Bulgaria to the Russian city of Novosibirsk. 78 people were on board that particular flight. Now, earlier this year, another Malaysian Airlines flight went missing after leaving Kuala Lumpur for Beijing. Now, you'll remember this, I'm sure. It lost contact with air traffic control on March the 8th. The company reported the aircraft missing. A massive worldwide search began for that jet, and as yet no trace has ever been found of it. The ongoing operation to locate that plane is currently centred hundreds of kilometres off the eastern coast of Australia. So potentially what...
Let's go across now, live to Moscow. Fred Viers, a journalist from Moscow, is joining us live on this broadcast. Fred Viers, what is the latest that you can tell our viewers about who the attackers were? Who are the people who fired the missile that brought this Malaysian Airlines down?
Well, it's impossible to say at this point, and it may be impossible for a long time to come because this sort of thing can take quite a while to untangle. But there seems no doubt if it's a long-distance flight traveling from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, it was flying very high, 10,000 meters at least, which is well over 5 miles high, and it's not these small kinds of missiles that, say, the rebels in the east have been using so far, you know, shoulder-held missiles for shooting down helicopters and low-flying fighter planes. You would need a very sophisticated air defense system to bring a high-flying airliner down. Have to be able to pinpoint the plane at that immense altitude and shoot it down. That's right. In 2001, an airliner, a Russian airliner, was shot down over the Black Sea by a Ukrainian S-200 missile. That's the sort of weapon that with a lot of investigating, a lot of blame flying back and forth before we ever find the truth, if we ever do.
Just stay with us, Mr. Vyas, for a moment. I want to go across to Air Marshal Ahluwalia, one of India's leading military thinkers. 33,000 feet up in the air. That's how high the Malaysian Airlines Boeing 777 was flying. What do you think could have brought it down? Who has the capability to be able to pull off something like this?
Well, this is undoubtedly, just like was mentioned earlier, that this has to be a sophisticated surface-to-air missile system. And what is available today with the rebels in Ukraine, the Ukrainian Air Force, and also the Russian Air Force, is the BUK-1M, that's the medium-range system, surface-to-air missile system.
Now, who's doing this, the government or the rebels?
No, so that is the question. That I think, as far as Russia is concerned, they seem to be out of this. This is my assessment.
No, but there are some reports that the Russian government could have done this as well.
No, it's not possible, because the Russians wouldn't have shot down an aircraft in somebody else's territory. So he's crashed somewhere near Donetsk. Now that is in Ukrainian territory. So Russia will not make that mistake of shooting an aircraft in a different country. That's number one. Number two, there are a lot of procedures as far as identifying, and a commercial airliner cannot be shot up just like that unless it is identified and confirmed that he's carrying out a hostile act. So in this case, neither of it was done. So all the fingers are pointing to some elements, perhaps of the Ukrainian rebels.
But how do rebels get hold of such sophisticated surface-to-air missiles?
That's the point, that at this point in time, I mean, in Ukraine, there is enough elements that have been able to get a lot of military resources which are available to them to do this kind of thing.
From where? From the Ukrainian army?
From the Ukrainian, from Russia.
Stole it from someone in the Russian system?
Given by, well, we should not say Russia, but given by maybe some other country. So therefore, the rebels also have. But the point is that this was an aircraft which was flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur at a height of 33,000 feet, and it was shot. 33,000 feet corresponds to about 10 kilometers. And the only other system that is available in that part of the world is what is known as the BUK, the Bravo Uniform Kilo 1M. It's a medium-range surface.
And it has such precision that it can take down a passenger aircraft.
It can. So therefore,
one shot, or would they have fired more?
Well, you can. It depends on what kind of a kill probability you want. You can fire one, or you can fire two, or you can fire in salvo.
Gaurav Sawant, this is Malaysian Airlines once more. We all know what happened to the ill-fated MH370. They're still looking for the debris of the aircraft. They haven't found it. Once again, it's a Malaysian airline aircraft that finds itself in this terrible, terrible situation.
This indeed is, and the Malaysian Airlines has tweeted. They of course haven't said officially that it's been shot down. What they've said is that lost contact with the aircraft. It was flying over Ukrainian territory. It was in touch with the aircraft when it took off from Amsterdam. It was on its way to Kuala Lumpur. But journalists, officials in Ukraine have confirmed that this aircraft was apparently shot down. State actors, non-state actors, still not known, but indications are, especially both with the Russian state and the Ukrainian state having denied shooting it down, all indications are that perhaps some rebel organization did have access to BUK-1.
While the Ukrainian rebels have been hogging international repute or infamy because of what they've been up to, do they have access to such sophisticated surface-to-air missiles that can bring down a passenger aircraft that's flying at 33,000 feet above sea level?
Of this before, and it was only yesterday there was a huge argument about the shooting down of an AN-26 transport plane, which the Ukraine government said Russia did, because the plane was flying at 6,000 meters, which is considerably less than the 10,000 meters this airliner was flying at. And the Ukrainian government argued, and it was only just yesterday, that it had to be a Russian missile that shot down that transport plane because the rebels don't have anything capable of doing that. So if we're saying now that, I think your military expert is exactly right, it would be this BUK system. It is a mobile system, but it would require like very capable operators and sophisticated radars. You have to pinpoint the target. You can't fire it blind. It's not one of these shoulder-held man pads. You need a radar lock on the target and the missile fired. This is a level of sophistication which we, at least until now, only associate with state armed forces. But I don't preclude that the rebels might have it. You've got a lot of strange things going on there in eastern Ukraine. A lot of military hardware going loose, and it's not just the pro-Russia rebels. You know, there are a lot of private militias that are pro-Kiev, and they have their hands on a lot of sophisticated military hardware. So we have here a genuine mystery, and I don't advise anybody to jump to conclusions.
Sure, that I think is very sensible advice, but this, Air Marshal Ahluwalia, is a worst nightmare scenario unfolding, because this is the sort of stuff that you see in movies. Now you have a realistic situation where a rebel group could possibly have got hold of a surface-to-air missile that can bring down a passenger aircraft. What ramifications does this have for India?
Well, this is what you might refer to the asymmetric threat of the future. You have two countries, Ukraine, you have Russia. You can easily identify if the radars, whichever radar, whether it was Russian or Ukrainian, picked up this aircraft, because it has to fly an airway, it has to fly an air route, it has to be identified after it took off from Amsterdam. It has to be picked up on radar, then it has to be after that identified, and after identification it will then pass it on to the surface-to-air missile system.
But why would Ukrainian rebels want to take down this Malaysian aircraft, Malaysian Airlines flight?
Certainly it may or may not be then, but the possibility is always there, especially when a lot of military hardware has been transferred to rebels by neighboring countries. And this is what is going to be the problem of the future.
Now, this particular area is a stronghold for pro-Russian separatists.
Yes.
Now, why would an area dominated by pro-Russian separatists want to bring the sort of global attention that would follow an attack of this nature?
Yes. Well, one thing is very clear, that it could be a mistake, it could be an error.
How can it be an error?
But even an error...
How can a surface-to-air missile get fired in through a mistake,
well, if you remember what happened to the 747, the Boeing 747, 007, the Korean Airlines, it was shot up because it was identified to have gone astray from its original track. So therefore, it could be possible that he has gone astray from his original track and perhaps identified as a threat. But however, having said that, even after being identified as a threat, he has to be confirmed, because he's a commercial airliner, to be carrying out some hostile act. Dropping parachutes.
Fred Viers, is there any information at all that the plane went off its pre-designated track that had been decided between the air traffic controls on both sides? Was there any hostile action at all carried out by people on board this Malaysian Airlines flight? Could it have been a mistake?
Well, it obviously was a mistake of some kind, and they do happen. I mean, there are other examples we could remember. Remember 1988, the USS Vincennes shot down an Iranian airliner over the Persian Gulf. It was an accident, terrible tragedy. These things do happen, but they happen with really sophisticated armed forces. They make a mistake, but the mistake is a complicated thing. I really have trouble seeing some militia, whether pro-Kiev or pro-Moscow, even if they have their hands on this book system, doing that. And I also wonder, I think, again, the facts have to come in, but a plane flying at that altitude, even when struck by a missile, will travel a very great distance, I should think, before it hits the ground. I'm not an expert on these things. I actually want to ask that of your military expert over there, but wouldn't it have to travel like quite a while, even if it came down in rebel-held territory? Wouldn't the missile strike have to have occurred quite a distance before that over Ukrainian territory?
And also, Air Marshal Ahluwalia, this is very sophisticated armory. Now, to be able to use a surface-to-air missile, you need a lot of training. You can't have some militia getting hold of a surface-to-air missile, plotting it on the radar, planning the trajectory and firing and having a successful hit. How does that happen?
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. However, what can be said is, I'm only eliminating the usual possibilities. What happens is that the Ukrainian rebels have also been part of the Ukrainian armed forces, and many of them are trained for such activities. But having said that, it's going to be very difficult because the radar should be able to track before you're able to pass it on to the surface.
But do rebels have such sophisticated radars?
No, they don't have the radars, but perhaps there must have been some internal, if at all. This is only a theory at the moment, and I think we'll have to wait for more answers, and I think it can be established very quickly as to what actually transpired by following the track of the aircraft through right from Amsterdam onwards, Russian airspace, the Ukrainian airspace. And to answer the previous question of a journalist on board, obviously if a missile hits an aircraft, it is going to break up into very small parts, mostly. There will be big parts, there will be small parts. So it will not be like an aircraft.
We can see some of that debris in the image over there. This apparently is about 20 kilometers short of entering Russian airspace. That's where these images are from, and you can see all the smoke billowing up in the sky.
Yeah, it will be very easy to identify exactly at what point through the radars this aircraft was hit. It'll also, and also the question is, it has IFF on board. And surely,
what is IFF for the benefit of our viewers?
IFF it's a system to identify what we say is identify friend or foe. It is to establish the identification of the aircraft, its location.
What has the IFF? This Boeing?
The Boeing. So it is
but
an
even if it has an
interrogation
IFF, it's not armed, unlike a military aircraft,
it's not armed. No.
Which will have some sort of a defense system.
Yeah.
A civilian aircraft is an easy object to target if you've got missiles like this.
No, this is an interrogation system. So the ground control can interrogate any rogue aircraft or any aircraft that has gone out of the airway. It can interrogate it to be able to identify which aircraft this is. So obviously, if they have been able to identify it, there's no reason whatsoever for it to be shut down. This seems to be a classic example of an error which is committed, and I would say that this in the future will be in the form of asymmetric threats. Whether it is
you're saying
state
it's an
actors,
error. You think somebody?
It is definitely an error.
What, it's not a hostile action, but somebody deliberately trying to bring it down.
No, because for every you've got to have a reason. There's got to be some logic, and there doesn't seem to be any particular reason why anybody would want to do this.
Because this region has seen severe fighting between Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian separatist rebels in recent days.
Yes.
But that is no reason to start firing up in the sky and bring down an international flight.
That is absolutely the case. In fact, the latest reports seem to indicate that both Russia and Ukraine are blaming each other. Russia is saying we have nothing to do with this. Ukraine's interior minister has been quoted as saying that these are either Russian forces or forces close to Russians who have brought down this aircraft. They've ordered an inquiry. In fact, the Ukrainian Prime Minister's office has ordered an inquiry into what they're saying is a major catastrophe. So they're admitting perhaps that this is a mistake, a big mistake, when now there's an inquiry that's underway.
No, by a mistake by who? A mistake by the Russian authorities, but they wouldn't be firing because the plane still is in Ukrainian airspace. So for them, it's not a hostile object. They can't possibly get confused. It can't possibly, at least to my basic understanding,
doesn't seem to be Russia.
Be the Russian Air Force or the Russian Army which would fire a surface-to-air missile that would bring down a civilian aircraft.
Absolutely not. It has flown right through Eastern Europe. From Amsterdam, it's been going eastwards, and it has not yet entered any Russian territory. So there's no reason whatsoever for Russia to have taken any such action against it. Therefore, the finger pointing can only be perhaps of some error being committed either through Russia or through Ukraine. It seems to be possible that this has happened in Ukraine because it has.
But how can it be an error? How can a missile just get fired through an error, sir? I don't understand that.
Error in the sense that those who are manning the posts, those who are manning these missile systems can make errors like this. You have a trigger-happy fellow, he can make this kind of mistake. You know what happened to 007, the Korean airliner. He had gone off the coast of Kamchatka, in eastern Russia. He had gone off the track, but there was no reason to shoot him down. However, the procedure says that if he doesn't listen or doesn't adhere to the instructions that are given, and the fighter aircraft believes that he's carrying out a hostile act, which means in this case he was carrying out reconnaissance, so they thought, and they just shot him up.
But that's crazy. Why would a civilian passenger aircraft be carrying out a recce for any militia? That makes no sense. Fred Vias, how is the Russian government? We've seen responses that Gaurav just read out to us from the Ukrainian Prime Minister. How is the Russian government responding to the charge that is being leveled that this seems to have been done either by groups acting closely in tandem with the Russian government or by someone in the Russian establishment?
You know, it's too early to get a considered response from any officials at this point, but I think the Russians will probably have a good deal to contribute to this discussion, because although I agree with your military expert, they would not have. The Russian armed forces are highly sophisticated. Hundreds of airliners fly over their territory every day. They wouldn't be shooting down an airliner over Ukrainian territory. But they would have radar, probably radar contact with that plane. They might very well know a lot about what happened to it. So let's watch what the Russians do say in the hours to come. Let's also watch what the Ukrainians say, because they too are one possible culprit, and they have committed an accident at least once of that sort before. And they do happen. It's clearly an accident of some sort. But also, we need to get information about any dispersion of these more sophisticated
Gaurav Sawant has a statement
systems.
that's just been put out. Gaurav.
That's right. This is a statement that has just come in from the Ukrainian president's office, Petro Poroshenko's office, and this calls for the creation of a government commission along with the ICAO, International Aviation Security Training Center, will also investigate this. And this says that around 4:20 local time, Malaysian Airlines number 17, which was flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, it disappeared. In recent days, this is the third tragic accident. This is the third such incident after an AN-26 and a Su-25 aircraft of the Armed Forces of Ukraine was shot down from the Russian territory. We do not exclude that this aircraft was also shot down, and stress that the Armed Forces of Ukraine did not commit any action in the air at the time of downing. The President of Ukraine, on behalf of the state, expresses its deepest and most sincere condolences to the family of the relatives of those killed in this terrible tragedy, and every possible search and rescue operation is underway.
Well, the Ukrainians are completely denying the involvement of their army and air force. The Russian army and air force haven't spoken up so far. There is a blame game that is currently on, but this is a nightmare situation unfolding, because just imagine if rebels or terrorists get hold of such weapons, then every single passenger airline is a sitting duck, and that really is a huge threat. We, of course, will keep tracking the story.